Hi guys, welcome back. So in this video we actually are going to get to do the Grease Weasel, and we're going to set it up and use the software it comes with. I've not done a Grease Weasel before. I've not had the hardware or the money or the time to do it, but I have one now, and so I am going to go through and do this. You'll be learning as I am learning. If you already know what these are about and how to use them, any help would be really great, especially if I'm not doing it quite right. We all have our own ways of doing things. Or if there are other utilities you recommend that are easy to understand, implement and use, then please chime in and leave a message down the bottom. I'm going to take you through installing the Grease Weasel software, and there are a couple of Windows shells you can put on, which makes it a graphical interface rather than trying to do it all through command lines. So what we'll do is we'll try one and then we'll try the other and see which one is best. Well, the best I like anyway. So we'll get on with that, and we'll have a look at Dave Dunfield's software as well for doing disk images in the IMG format, which most of mine will be because they are IBM proprietary type of disks and drives. It also pertains to the other types you can use, which is the Apples, the Amigas and that sort of stuff, just a slightly different way of setting up the perimeters. So guys, grab yourself a drink, a snack or two, and a comfy chair. Sit back and let's get on with it.
And so, it begins.
Hey guys, well, we're ready to go. I will just switch you over to the desktop and then we can get on with going to the site, downloading the software, downloading the front ends, and installing the software. Okay, so this is the GitHub website for the Grease Weasel. And what we want to do is, because there are so many different versions of the Grease Weasel around, we need to go to the Downloads Center. So we click on that link and it comes up here. Now this tells you all about different versions you can download, what's the processes of going through it, like purchasing a Grease Weasel or building and flashing a DIY one, how to set up your hardware and how to install your software. So what we will do is, if you look on the right hand side of the screen, there is a lot of bullets down the side there, and there's getting started, building a Grease Weasel, and user installation. So we want to go to the user installation, and if we look in there, there's hardware setup, and then they have the two newer versions, which is a version 4 and a version 4.1. Now the one I have is the 4.1, so we'll click on the link for the 4.1, and now as you can see, this has taken us through to the desktop for the 4.1. So what we need to do is, it just says here things you need to make sure you have, which is a floppy drive, the data cable, a power and the USB cable for your Grease Weasel. Now we have all of that. And also it says here there are links to go to jumper configuration of the Grease Weasel, terminators of the floppy drives, and if you want external LEDs. And this is if you're putting your Grease Weasel into an external case. What we will do is we will now get on to what we need to do. So if you look down the list, it tells you things about floppy drives and the types of drives you can use and what the differences are between some of the drives. It also tells you about what the twist in the cable is for the IBM PCs that they use and what some of the others don't use. It also reminds you that the Grease Weasel can't put more than 5 volts through the USB port, and that for the 5¼ inch drives and maybe some of the other older drives, it pays to have your own power supply to connect up to it. This is also usable with Mac and Linux machines as well, if you want to use the Grease Weasel with that. Then it goes on to the Grease Weasel on setting things up to, like, if you want to enable the write function, so you can actually write disks with it, to use the 5 volts from the USB to run a 3½ inch drive, and if you want to look at updating the firmware on the Grease Weasel. Now this is only recommended if you have an older Grease Weasel that you may need to update the firmware in it. So that is up to you if you want to do that. Mine is 4.1, so it should be pretty much up to date, and it's only like about 3 or 4 weeks old. The next thing is about drive termination, and I'm not going to worry about this because my drive is a newer dual speed drive, so it won't need to worry about changing the terminations on it. And then of course there's a bit down the bottom all about the external LEDs. So now most of mine, I'm pretty sure I know what I have. So what we will do is we will go through to the software installation, which is at the top of the page here. And this is for the 4.1. So now we come into here and it says what operating system are we using, Windows, Mac or Linux. So what we'll do is I'm using Windows, so I will click on Windows. And I'm using a Windows 10 PC, guys. So if you're using Windows 10 or 7 or I'm not sure about 11, then you can follow along with what I'm doing. Now, in here, as it says, when you download the Grease Weasel software to unzip and install it, it needs the Microsoft USB ser.sys driver. Now, Windows 10 and 11 have that, and it will automatically install it when you run the Grease Weasel software. If you have below Windows 10, then you're going to have to install the ZADIG, and this will allow your Grease Weasel to be run via USB. Just follow these instructions if you don't have Windows 10 or 11. But simply what we need to do is we need to grab the Grease Weasel software. So we go into the download option for Windows, and then what we come to is look for what version of Windows you are running. So are you running a 64-bit version of Windows or the 32-bit version of Windows? So I'm running the 64-bit, so I will click on that and it will pop up and say, here it is, where do you want to save it? So I'll just save it into a folder on my hard drive, and I'll go into here. Now I've made up a folder called Grease Weasel, so I will go into here and I will save the file into here. Now I've already downloaded these last night, and I just unpacked them. I haven't played with the software, I've just downloaded and unpacked them just to save a little bit of time. So once we've gone through and downloaded this version we want, then I go back to the previous page. So I click the left back button. If you don't have the left back button, you can come back down here and go to the version 4.1 setup. That will take you back to this page, and then we can go back into the software downloads. Now when we go into the software installation part of it again, the other thing we're going to want to do is these are two Windows GUI wrappers for the Grease Weasel, and there is Flux My Floppy by Frank. I'm not sure how you pronounce your last name, Frank, I'm sorry, and I don't want to make a fool of myself and you, but there's his wrapper for Windows, and then there's the Grease Weasel GUI by Don Mankin. Those are two, so we're going to download both of those, and if you click on each of the links, it'll take you to their GitHub repository. Now the Flux My Floppy one, you just need to come up to code, click on the button, and then download zip. And when you do that, it will download the zip file to where you want to on your machine. And I just downloaded it into the same folder that I've put the Grease Weasel into. So it's into here, and then you just go save and save it into that. So then what I do is then I go back to where we were, and I grab the Grease Weasel GUI by Don. So click onto that. Now this takes you to his website where you can download it. And if you look in here, you just come down and look and find the latest version, which is 2.123 at the time of doing this video. And it's for Host Tools 1.19. So just click on that, and then it will come up to say to download, where do you want to download? And I put that into the same place where I put the Grease Weasel file. And just go save, and then that will save it into there. So once we've done all that, then we've pretty much downloaded most of the things we're going to need. This is just for the Grease Weasel side of it. There are other tools and utilities we're going to download a little bit later, which help with using the Grease Weasel and doing things with the files and inspecting the files that the Grease Weasel makes. But for now, we're going to go through and set up the Grease Weasel. if you want to go through a bit of a tutorial on how to do this, what you can do is on the right hand side of the screen again, we look down to usage, and then under usage there's getting started, and there is Yaron Sarah's tutorial. Now if we click on that, this is a really good tutorial. Yanon, sorry, not Yaron, sorry about that, Yanon. And this is a really good tutorial to go through to set things up if you can't follow what I'm doing. And it goes through and tells you what the difference is between having 2 and 3 drives and why there's a difference. And it goes through things like accessing, reading, writing floppy disks. And then it goes through what we're going to go through, which is the types of ways to write floppy disks. And it gives you examples of, if you look at this, it'll be the type of disk, so what it's for, an Amiga, an Acorn, an Atari, an IBM PC. Then it will give you a profile, which is built into Greaseweasel. It'll tell you the heads there are, or how many sides there are on the disk, how many cylinders are on it, the RPM, the kilobytes per second, or kilobits per second that it writes at, how many sectors per track, how many bytes per sector, and the encoding type, the size in kilobytes or kilobits of the whole disk. And then if we scoot across, I just have to, it's actually wider than the page they make it at. It tells you what the suffix of the disk is on the very end one here. And this is what they will be saved as when you run it through the Greaseweasel. And this tells the Greaseweasel what the parameters are that it needs to save it as. So when we go through, and if we go through to the IBM, we'll be looking at, these are the IMGs, which is pretty much what most of the IBM formats do. But there are others which are a little bit off to what the standard ones are. The first one is, it's a pain the way they've done this, but it's the way it's been done on GitHub. The first one is, these are 3.5 inch discs, and then from this bit down, these are all 5.25 inch discs. So we come down into here, and these are the different types of IBM discs. So there's the 160K, the 180, the 320, the 360, the 1.2s, and then we start getting into other ones and other types. So these will be the main ones we'd be looking at. And most of these use an IMG or an IMA. Those are the main types of disk types that we will be saving them as. And this is for when you're doing them for emulators. The one that, what I am going to do, this will also take you through some of the issues you may have with not finding certain things when you're doing the image. The image type I am going to be doing, and this tells you about the high density, low density, is I'm going to be working with the magnetic flux read and write for disks. This is also good if you've got copy protected disks as well. Now the format that I am going to be doing is the HFE, and this is probably the better of the ones for the IBM formats to save it as, because then this, being an HFE, can be dropped directly on a Gotek or something like that, and it will read it as if it's an exact copy of the disk. We're going to go through all this, guys, and step by step, and set ours up, and hopefully we'll get something working out of it. So here we go through, and it goes through other things here. HXC, that's another one we're going to download. There are some other disk utilities here. There's also SAMDisk. There's A8 raw converter. There's lots and lots and lots of little tools that we can go through and have a look at. And we'll get into this after we get the Greaseweasel working. We will go right to the very top, and we will go through setting this up. Okay guys, so now we're going to install the software. I've unpacked or unzipped the file in the hard drive here, and if you're using Windows, you generally just right click and then it will come up with extract all, and that's what I've done. I've just extracted the folders. The Greaseweasel 1.19 Win64 is the 64-bit version of Greaseweasel. Now you can't run that just as it is in Windows because it is a command line driven only piece of software. That's why we need one of these wrappers. Now I'm not sure with the FluxMyFloppy, as I'm not sure how to install it. The Greaseweasel GUI is quite straightforward. If we go into that when it's extracted, all we need to grab is the Greaseweasel GUI exe file and the disk defs config file. And that gives us a basic definition of the disk setups for Greaseweasel. Now if you read the README file, it tells you how to jump on the net and download the latest disk defs, if there's any new ones, depending on how old your version of it is. But you can go on there and download the latest def files. But I'm going to use this one because a lot of the stuff I want to do is quite old and is already in there. So what you need to do is just highlight those two files and copy them. Then come back up, go into the Greaseweasel folder and paste them in here. They need to be in the same folder as the Greaseweasel does, the software for it. So once you've done that, you don't run the GW file, which is this one down here, the Greaseweasel file. You don't run this, you run the Greaseweasel GUI exe file. And what that will do is that will go through and pick up what your hardware is in your machine and set up where everything is in your machine. So what you do is once that's done, then what you need to do is to go into Windows to Control Panel, and in Control Panel, I'm on Windows 10, remember, I go to Devices, Other, and if you look down here, there's a new device on the USB serial devices, COM11. Now if I unplug the Greaseweasel, that will disappear for me. So check which one you have, and if you're not sure if there's more than one listed here, unplug your Greaseweasel and plug it back in and see which one it is that goes away and comes back. We need to know what COM port it's running at, because that's the one we're going to have to tell the software to use, because it'll just list up all the ports that we have. So we know it's at COM11, so I can get out of here. Right guys, so before we go on to running the software, just going over the hardware side of it. I have an old AT power supply here, the old push button style. So it's just an old one I got. The button actually, the tip broke off it, so I use it for on the bench here. I have the multi-speed drive 1.2, the floppy cable, and I have the Greaseweasel that's plugged in and powered on, and that's just via the USB cable to the PC that's over the side there. The Greaseweasel, I'm using it out of the box, so it is exactly as it came. So I'll just put it up here and you can see, the jumpers that it's jumpered as. And these are all just defaults. And I thought I don't know enough about the hardware just yet, so I will leave it at defaults. So that's what we have guys, and it's all powered up. And remember, I'm running this off an external power supply because the 5¼ inch drives draw too much power with the 12 volts, and the Greaseweasels can't handle that voltage coming over the USB port. Alright, back to doing the software. Okay, the software side of things. Now I'm going back into the Greaseweasel folder, and I've made another folder under this. It's just so I know where I've saved my images, and I've called it disk imgs, just for my disk images. So that's just a blank folder I've made. You can make one up, or you can save them wherever you like. Go into the Greaseweasel software, come down to the bottom here, and so we run the Greaseweasel GUI exe, not the GW exe, as that's the DOS version of it. When you run this, you need to remember the IRQ that or the ID that your Greaseweasel is using. Remember, we got that through Windows. So double click the file and it starts up. And this is what happens. It needs to set up the INI file. And here is mine is on COM11. So my one was on COM11, and that's the one I want to click. So what happens is that tells the Greaseweasel to write its INI file and that I'm using COM11. Now what you may find is that once you've used Greaseweasel, if you go out and then come back in, depending on what you plug in and unplug out of your PC, the COM port might change. So you may need to just double check what COM port you've got. And then if you come back into here, so what I'll do is I'll just close out of here. So it's written the INI file here, which has the information that it needs to for what we've just used. So if this is a few days later or a week or a month later and we run the file again, it does tell us this is where we need to look for loading the disk defs, and that's in the INI file, and by default it should have put that in there if you've told it where it was. If not, you can edit this in a text editor like Notepad or WordPad or something along those lines. Okay, so then when we start it back up, you'll see it's all greyed out. So if we've unplugged it and plugged it back in over this time, we'll be able to hit the refresh option, which this will then highlight all the ports that the Grease Weasel can see, and we can select the right one that we look at under Windows and Control Panel to find out what our Grease Weasel is running on. So ours are still running on 11, so we can leave that as it is. What we need to do is, just to be sure, we come up to here to Globals and then go Use the disk defs file. So once we do that, it's going to ask where it is, and it will generally look to where Grease Weasel is. And because it was there when we copied the shell over, we'll use that. That's why you need to save this. If you're going to put an updated version of the config file, you need to put it in the same folder. So then we can select it and go open, and that's loaded all the defaults in that file for the Grease Weasel to use. Now you can go through with a text editor and have a look at that file and just see what's in there. There are a few tutorials on YouTube about making your own definition files, but I'm not going to get into that. I don't need to do that at this stage, so it's a little bit beyond what I can do. Anyway, so we have this all set up. What I will do is I'll run through some of these and then we can see what happens. Under profiles, you can make a new profile or you can delete a profile. We're using the Grease Weasel GUI profile, so that is selected. Information, there is nothing at the moment, so if we click on this, it tells you a little bit about what the GUI does. Then of course, as we've done before, globals, we can go into here and select enable USB support. The defaults, I leave them ticked, I don't play around with. This one you can turn on elapsed time, and that tells you how long you've been using it for or how long it's been running. Then if you go defaults, this will actually reset everything, and you can go through and do a reset up with it too. And create shortcuts, puts a shortcut on your desktop for Windows. And then if you go to about, that just tells you about the versions of Grease Weasel, and it also says that for an emulator there is Flash Floppy, which you can use for emulating disks, so you don't have to use the real thing. And it says that Grease Weasel and Flash Floppy do work together. So that's what all this is about, guys. We can get out of here. Now down to business. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not 100% on this drive, so what we will do is I will go in and tell it to do an RPM of the spindle. So I will click on that, and then all you do is, once you've selected what you want, you just hit the select option, and what this will do is this will go off, open a DOS shell and run the command with the proper parameters that it needs. So we go select. Now this is if you want to change a couple of things around. This is like iterations, this is how many times. The F7 drive select, this is for, I believe, an older version of the Grease Weasel, so I'm not worried about that. So what I'm going to do, everything I'm going to leave the same. The only thing might be is if I want it for how many times I want it to do something, I will change. So therefore it comes up here and it tells us what the command is, and because this is using the command console mode, and then all we do is we go launch, it opens up a window, and there we have it here. It says that the rate is 359.609 RPM, and that's how long it took, which is pretty reasonable. It's a fraction under, but there is a variance in the speed, so that's within the limits. So that's telling us that it's rotating at 360 RPM. And this is where you can tell what your drive is set to. So whether your drive is a 300 RPM drive or a 360 RPM drive. And that comes into the double density, high density drives and single density drives. And they have different speeds. So now we can just close that window, because this is just giving us information about our drive. And so that's our drive spindle. So now we go back. And so what we can do from here, we can do some other bits and pieces. But what we'll do is, rather than playing around with the disk, is I will go in and do bits and pieces just to measure that the hardware is working. So we'll go in to measure the bandwidth. Now this is the bandwidth it uses across the cable from the Grease Weasel to your PC. And this will tell you how well it will actually record information to your PC. So we go select, and therefore again it shows us what the command is. So if we want to do it via DOS, we can find out what the commands are. And then we go launch, and as you can see there, it's done a write bandwidth, so writing information across it to the PC and reading it from the PC is giving us what the bandwidths are. And this is how much information and the times. So, this is the mean amounts of information it will send us across in megabits per second. So it tells us the flux rate, and it says us what the average in microseconds is. So we've got a pretty good bandwidth. I think it's running on USB 2, so that's not too bad. And we'll go back, and pin level is only if you're using a straight through cable, and this will go through and detect what pin is set to on your drive. So there are a few other things here. I don't want to reset the device, and we don't want to update firmware. This allows you to do it via the GUI to update the firmware. There is a way you have to set the Grease Weasel up with some jumpers to be able to do that via the USB from your PC off the internet. So that's one thing you got to do, but mine is too new to worry about. I know as of now there is a new firmware version that's looking at being trialled, and there may be a new one out in time to come, but I'm not going to look at doing that for now. So I'm going to go and tell it to do a Seek Cylinders test. Now what I will do is I will do this, but I will also, there's not much to see on the drive actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Seek Cylinders. Now what this will do is this will tell me if it's actually going to the head home position. So what we'll do is we'll go start, seek head 0, sector 0, and launch. And I don't know if you heard that, but I'll just redo that again. And so that's it doing a seek, and that's making sure that the heads are at sector 0. So we've done that. The heads are obviously moving fine. The RPM, the spindle, is moving fine. So what we can do, if you had a cleaning disk, you can put one in and run this clean heads option. And this is a good way if you want to run it for a certain amount of time, you can run it to clean your heads really, really well. Ours is 80 cylinders, which it knows. Now passes, it'll do it just once unless you tell it how many you want to do. So we'll tell it to do it 3 times. And then if we go launch, and that's it. So it's gone through all 80 sectors and done a head clean. Well, it didn't do a head clean because I don't have a cleaning disk. I just have an old high density floppy I've put in there, and I just let it go backwards and forwards on that. So now what we can do is we can tell it to see if it can read that disk. Now I think that disk is empty anyway, but we will see. So what we'll do is we'll go read, and that gives us the command that it's going to do. It's going to do it to an SCP. Now this is where we can go through and tell it what we want it to do. If you know that your disk is the 300K rather than the 360, you can turn the adjust speed on to it, and that will actually tell the drive to record it at that. I don't know what the pin is set to, so we won't worry about this. This is the fake index. This is only for those drives where you can jumper the drive so it doesn't look for the index hole. So just remember that. I will leave this as default. I'm not double stepping because it's not a low density disk. You can change the file name here. So we can change it from the SCP to something else. And we can also tell it what file type we want to save it as. So we can go through and set it what we want. So we say IMG. So it'll be called my disk IMG. We can set what format we expect it to be. So if we know what type of disk we're reading, so we can go through and actually select. This just narrows it down so it knows more on what it is trying to archive. You could leave a lot of these untagged and just tell it to go, and it will do the best it can do. So we know it's a 1.2, so we'll go to that. And as you can see, this is the command line it is putting in. Now if you want to run this stuff from DOS, this is all the information you're going to need. So you could, if you wanted to, and you're going to do this stuff from DOS, you could set it up through this GUI, then copy this and paste it into Notepad. And if you paste it into Notepad, you could have all your commands and you could write a bit about them, or WordPad or Word, and you could have a bit about them, what they do. Now there are some things about floppy offsets for Panasonic and TIAC. I'm not sure what that's about, but mine is neither of those two drives. You really need to probably read through some of the information on the shell or on the Greaseweasel side of the software to find out what these are about. I have no idea. Sorry guys, I'm just too new to this. But anyway, we've set it for this. So now what we can do is we can select a folder where to save it. And so what we can do is we'll say where we want to put it. Now I'll put it inside my disk images folder. And then what we can do is then go launch. Now if you want to read, you'd go select file rather than select folder. So what we'll do now is we'll go launch. And it's brought up the information we need. And so what it is now doing is going through, and it's actually telling us what the file format is. So it's picked up that there's a sector missing. So I'm not sure, as I say, I'm not too sure about this disk. So I mean, we let it go through and do its thing. And there we go, and it's showing us exactly what we have. And that is a blank disk. That is pretty much what I thought I had. So now what we do is we can go back. And what I can do is tell it to go through and do a disk erase. And we go select, and that's telling us the command line there, and we go launch. Okay, we're going to close the window first, and then go launch. And there it is, erasing all the tracks. So there was nothing on this disk that I needed, and I'm pretty sure it was just a blank one I had that was in the box of discs I had floating around. And this will go up to track 79. Well, 82. Okay. Oh yes, because the indexing tracks. Yep. So 80 sectors. So that's fine. So that went through fine. So we can go back. Now if we wanted to, if we had an image, we could try writing it back as a if we had a high density disk, and we could read from it and save a file and then write it back. But I don't have one at the moment, so what we can do is have a look at our file. So what we did is when we did this, we actually saved our file into our disk images, and this is our IMG file. So we don't have anything associated with this to open it with. Now this is where I was telling you we need some other software to actually open these files. What we need to do is we need to go back to the desktop, and we need to go on the internet, and there's a couple of bits of software we're going to need to download. And one is HXC, and the other one is Dave Dunfield's drive image software. Now unfortunately Dave's software we're not going to get to use in this one because I have to do that board in the PC that I bricked the BIOS on, so I've got to reflash that. So once I've done that, we'll go back and use Dave's software, and we'll go down that track of imaging stuff. What I will do is I will exit out of here, and we'll go back to the desktop and download the HXC software. Okay guys, so now we're back on the Greaseweasel website, and so what we need to do is go into the software installation option. We need to go into Jan's folder, and if we scoop down to the bottom of that, we will see there are some links here to some disk utilities. Now there's one called Disk Utilities, which is helpful for converting the SCP or the older DFI flux archives, but I don't need that. What we need is the HXC floppy emulator. So if we go in and select that, that will take us to the HXC floppy emulator page, and then we want the HXC floppy emulator software zip file. So we can grab that and download it. It's not a very big file, so we just click on that and save that to the same folder we saved our other files to, which is inside my Greaseweasel folder. So we do that and save. Then we can go back to that page again, put on the Greaseweasel. There are other disks in here and software in here that you may want to play around with, and there is one there called SamDisk. Now this does a lot of the C64, TSR80 and ZX Spectrums and stuff like that. So these are more your exotic ones that you're going to use. Now most of mine are going to be in the PC style and CP/M, so they should be fine with the HXC emulator, so that should be fine. There's also other things here. There's an alternative Flux Engine which supports this formats for Apple II and Apple DOS and Pro DOS and Victor 9000, etc., as it says here. Failing that, you can go through and create your own formats with the disk devs, and there is a couple of videos on YouTube which takes you through the very basics of that. Unlike I do, guys, I take my time and wander through this stuff with you. Some of these guys I find on YouTube, they rush through it really quick and they don't show you everything you need to do. I try to show you what you need to know rather than just skip through it really fast. So what we'll do is we will now go back to our folder where the HXC floppy emulator has been put. We will now decompress that and go in and run it and have a look at it. So we will flip back to that now. Right guys, so now we're inside the folder. All we do is with Windows is we just right click the file and it comes up and we just do extract all, and that'll just extract it into a folder inside here. And then we go inside the HXC floppy emulator software folder, go inside of that. Now there are two folders in here. The top one is for DOS disk browsing, so this is if you want to use it in DOS, the HXC. We want to use it in Windows, so we just use the non-DOS descriptive one, which is to me is this bottom one. So I go inside of here, and then it will give us what version we need. So there's the Mac OS, the Windows 64-bit, or the Windows 86-bit version. And so in here there is the release note text file, and these two copying full files are text files on the HXC software, and it has their links to their web pages and their Facebook pages, etc. inside here. So have a look through those and see what you think. I need to run the Windows 64-bit version, so I go into that folder, and there is the HXC floppy emulator exe, and that is the one I run. Don't run the HXCFE exe file, run the emulator file. And so when that starts up, it starts up as a little window on the side here, and this allows you to load your files. That's if they're image files, or you can load the raw images. So what we're going to do is we'll go load a file, and it will say where. So we'll go into our disk images folder and we'll select the IMG file and then go open. Now at the bottom of it here, it tells us the name of the disk, how many tracks, how many sides the disk is that we've got loaded into the emulator. So from here we can go floppy images, and we can do all sorts of things. We can load custom, create DOS and Amiga disks. We can export disks, save them as something else, batch convert a pile of images. We can dump a floppy disk. So this is using the Grease Weasel as well, I think. We can do a track analyzer, and that is another interface which goes via the network, I think. Now we go track analyzer. Now this is actually looking at the data that we saved off our disk. So we'll bring this up a lot bigger, and on the right here we can see information about it, and down the bottom it will tell us where we are and what we're doing. So as I go across these, this is telling us what is on each of these sectors on the disk. You can change the way that it shows you the information as well, and by running down the disk it tells us where we are and what information we're actually looking at. So what we want to do is go track views down the very bottom right hand side. Now that's our standard. We can do a stream view, but this doesn't have any stream. So what we can do is then come down and tell it to show us what it is. Now we know it's a 96 TPI disk and it's a 5 1/4 inch, so we select that. Now it's actually showing us the graphical representation of what the disk looks like. And from here we can run over each of these and it will tell us the information on the box on the right hand side. And you can go around each of your sectors, and this is where, if you're not sure, if you dump an image of a disk, you can pretty much go through and find out what your disk is. So you'll find out how many sectors there are, the size of the sectors, how many tracks you got. All this information is held in doing it in this format. And this is why I say on the Grease Weasel, that's why I do the Flux image, because it takes all this information for you. Now there are other, it knows that this is in the MFM, FM style. That's why the 3 options are selected here. Now you can deselect the ones you know it's not. So we know it's not the Amiga MFM, so we could untag that if we want to. But this, I'm just using this to look at the disk to see how it looks. And I mean, this looks pretty good. Even though it is a blank disk, it's actually showing us information on what the disks will have. And there's lots in it. You need to read through the documentation to find out what to do with a lot of these. As I say, I'm only just playing around with this stuff now. I don't know it inside out. And you go through your settings, your internal parameters, the USB HXE floppy emulator settings. Now this will be for between this and probably the Gotek. And this will change the look. So you've got the classic look, which is what I have now. You can go to what's called the plastic look, which is that. You can then go to the GTK Plus, which is that. And then we can go to the Gleam, which is that. I just put back the classic. And then there are also log files, and then you have About, which just tells you about the emulator. So it'll take you to their website, the forums, Facebook, latest release notes, the GPL license, etc. So that takes you to all that information. A lot of these emulators and stuff are still being worked on and updated and everything, so be aware that you may have to update your version and get a newer one. So guys, that's just the real basics of it. The other software I downloaded, the Flux My Floppy, I'm not 100% sure how to install that to see what that looks like with the Grease Weasel. I need to, there's not a lot of information on the webpage about how to actually set it up and use it. So I'm not 100% sure with that. I'm going to have a look around and see if I can find somewhere that shows me or tells me how to install it, and then we'll come back to that. As I said, the other thing we need to look at is probably downloading Dave Dunfield's drive image software. Now you can shoot off and grab that anyway on the internet and download it ready for when we're going to go through it, or you can play around with it for yourself. Okay guys, so now I've finished with what I can do at this stage with the Grease Weasel. I will go back and image those CP/M discs in a minute. This is Dave Dunfield's website, Dave's Old Computers, and on here he has all sorts of information about archiving machines and discs and stuff like that, and he has a pile of already archived discs on here. So if you're looking for something for a machine and you don't have the discs for it, have a look on his website first and see what you can find. So as you can see, he's got piles and piles and piles of stuff. But what I want is to go into here, and he has got simulators and emulators. He's got software images, DOS widgets and related links, and it also has his contact information if you want to get a hold of him. But what I'll do is I want to go into software images, and inside here, when we go into software images, he has information about connecting 8-inch drives as external drives. And there's also one in here about doing the modification to the 1-point drive to make it 300 RPM. Now this is one of the drives that I showed you on the last video that had the switch on the front. Now this takes you through doing that. So what we'll do is we'll jump into here, and this tells you how to modify it, the steps to go through, taking it apart and doing all the bits you need to do and putting it back together. If you want to, let me know. I can take my one apart and we can go through that piece by piece so you can see what's to be done on the drive. Right, so next what we can do is, with Dave's site, he has two files we'll need. One is called test FDC. Now if you're building up a PC for doing the imaging of disks in, grab the test FDC. This will check the controller in the PC to make sure it is compatible with using dual speed drives. It will go through and tell you if it's good or whether it's not good. If you have a machine that has plug-in floppy controllers, this will check those out as well. So that's the test FDC. It's a zip file, so we can save that into our Greaseweasel folder as well. The next thing we're going to need is image disk. Now this is version 1.2. I think that's where Dave finished when he was making them. And so what we do is we want to grab that and save that into our folder. And if there's anything else here, have a look down through the list and see if there's anything here you need to get for yourself. And these are for transferring files into image files. There's one there for all CP/M disks, so I'll grab that one as well because that's what I am going to be doing. But that I will try when I got the machine running it with Dave's software, other than doing it how I'm going to do it through the Greaseweasel. Out of those, there's not much else I'm going to need to worry about grabbing. And as I say, you can go through, there's lots and lots of information in here. Yeah, just browse through it. It's a wealth of knowledge. So guys, so those are what we've got. Bits of software. As I say, I can't run it at the moment because the machine needs to be put back together. That's all going into. So what we will do is I will now exit out of here and we'll go back to having a look at archiving these CP/M disks. Well guys, there we have it. Not quite 100% there, but you can see where I'm going with it. I need to sort that machine out so I can do the software with Dave Dunfield's drive image and then try the CP/M tools to make sure I can read the disks and that sort of thing, like if it was a normal PC, CP/M that is. So what I'll do is I'm going to leave this one here. It's getting a little bit long and I've cut out as much as I can without leaving out anything you may want to know or to see. I will do the PC and get that sorted, put back together, and we can have a look at doing Dave's software. And I'll go through the PC setup I've done too, which I think you'll find is interesting. I've done it as a DOS 6.2, a Windows 95 and a Windows 98 on 3 partitions, and it's running through the Boot Manager software that I found a little while ago. So guys, until next time, have a great day. Have a great week. Till next time. Ciao.